On today's episode of the Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings podcast, Maxwell Baumbach and I are going to help you, the listener, better understand how to evaluate the forward position in the upcoming 2026 NBA Draft with some of our best tips and insights learned from years of scouting.
You are Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings, your daily podcast on the future stars of the NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Nathan Grubel, current No Ceilings contributor, scouting consultant, and evaluator of prospects for the last 14 years. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network and are available wherever you get your podcasts as well as on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe, rate, review. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets. Download the FanDuel.com app to get started. Joining me this week is my co-host, lead columnist, creator of the No Stone Unturned series for No Ceilings, Maxwell Baumbach. Maxwell, how are we doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to talk about Cam Boozer later in the show. Going to throw that one out right away, but also excited to talk about the forward position. It's so important and it is ever evolving in the modern landscape. So couldn't be more excited for this episode.
We've been waiting for the perfect excuse to talk about Cam Boozer, and today we have it because on today's show, Maxwell and I are going to run through some of our best tips and insights for scouting the forward position for the upcoming 2026 NBA draft class. We're going to hit on some of the key skills and traits we're watching out for on offense as well as on defense in relation to the position. And then, like Maxwell said, we're going to wrap up by covering arguably one of the best prospects in the upcoming 2026 NBA draft class, let alone the best forward prospect in Cameron Boozer. Before we get started, I do want to shout out the other members of the Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings team. Both Tyler Rucker and Tyler Metcalf just released an episode covering their own deep sleeper in the class in Alabama freshman London Jemison. And Corey Tulba and Albert Gim broke down the game of Houston's freshman center Chris Sinak. Both episodes are available to watch or listen wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Maxwell, how to scout forward. So if everyone's been following along, in case you haven't, you can certainly go back and listen to or watch some of the episodes Maxwell and I have been doing in a series where we're talking about how to scout positions in the upcoming draft class. And the whole reason for this is when we get to an off season, it's a really great chance for people to reflect on their own scouting processes. What were some of the things they hit on in terms of evaluating prospects? Where were some of the misses? Where are some ways in which they can improve their own process? And so Maxwell and I have done this for a number of years as credentialed NBA draft analysts. So we just wanted to share some of our best tips and insights in scouting different positions as we went ahead. So we've covered guards, we've covered wings, and now we get to the forward position, which, Maxwell, it's a very interesting positional category because you and I sometimes go a little bit back and forth in terms of how to break down certain position types and how to evaluate them. Like, I think in your No Stone series, you've done a great job at breaking out guards, wings, and bigs. And when I was sitting down thinking about how I evaluate the forward position, how I would even define it, I think when I'm talking about a wing in particular, they are very perimeter-centric players, both on offense and defense. And while the forward position can share some of those characteristics, we may even end up talking about someone in Cam Boozer who's considered more of a power wing along with being a forward. But forwards also have to share some of the responsibilities of a big. And what do I mean by that? They have to be able to, operate both offensively and defensively inside the paint. They need to be able to cover ground along the baseline. They need to be secondary, rim protectors, defensive playmakers. That's some of the stuff we're going to get into. But when you think about, defining different position groups, Maxwell, what really stood out to you about forwards when you were trying to figure out, what tips and things you were going to pick apart as far as evaluating the position?
Yeah, how hard it is to be a good one, honestly. Like, I is ridiculous as that sounds on the surface, there is so much that is demanded out of a modern forward, especially if we're talking fours. In today's NBA, where it's like, you've got to be able to protect the rim. You've got to be able to switch up. Also, we kind of need you to be able to shoot now. And also, if you are going to shoot, it's also going to be really nice if you can exploit those mismatches inside. And then, by the way, when you're on defense, we can't have you being exploited because you're too slow. You need to be quick enough to hang with the smaller guys, strong enough to bang with the bigger guys. And then on the other end, you got to mismatch those smaller guys, be faster than the big guys. It's just, there's so many balls in the air for a modern power forward that it's a lot. It's very tricky. There's a lot of nuance that goes into it. And there are so many boxes that need to be checked to be truly effective at that position.
100%. And where I think we've evolved the most in particular, you threw in the word modern, and you're talking about, like I said, a lot of those different perimeter overlaps that you can find between the wing position and the forward position. Back in the day, you'd have an old school power forward who was arguably as much of a post-up threat as your center. You could run a lot of offense to those guys. Like, I know we're talking about Cam today, but when I think about power forward, I think about guys like Carlos Boozer and even Al Jefferson to an extent. Guys who played a lot with their back to the basket and were focused primarily on supporting their big men on the glass, making sure that rebounding was a big emphasis of their game, efficient interior scoring, setting screens for a lot of guys, and really doing and complementing a lot of things that, you know, your big would do, but sharing a lot of those skills. When we talk about modern forwards now, there are a lot of, you know, different team constructs where we're seeing like the Cleveland Cavaliers play like a double big lineup where Evan Mobley is, you know, obviously a modern forward with some of the skills and traits he possesses, but he also is still a close to 7-footer with incredible length. He's certainly a guy who can help protect the rim, and he shares a lot of those traits that Jared Allen does, quite frankly, on both offense and defense. So the forward position is very interesting, but like I said, I think we're primarily focused on guys who are helping to support inside as much as they are outside. But I think some of those important crossovers that we're making sure we prioritize when we look at forwards. I know my first tip that I wrote down is evaluating forwards in terms of passing on the move, right? When I say that, I'm talking about, you know, what kind of decisions are they able to make off baseline cuts, off of short rolls, transition runouts. And I'm also going to throw, even though it's not technically on the move in a sense of, you know, downhill half court, but I'm going to throw outlet passing in there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
A very reliable trait for forwards to be able to hang their hat on is cleaning the defensive glass and then immediately rocketing that ball out. Like we saw a lot of those types of passes from, you know, one of our favorite players across the Kevin Love is a great outlet passer. We've seen it from just the way that the Indiana Pacers were able to play in the playoffs this year. And the Oklahoma City Thunder have a lot of guys who play in the finals who were great at throwing those types of passes. Those are the types of things that I want to see out of modern forwards, because you can't just be a ball stopper at any position in today's NBA. We've reiterated it multiple episodes now. That quick decision-making that we like to talk about, Maxwell, it applies to guys who you normally wouldn't have associated that with back in the day as much now. It's insane how much the game has evolved.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that it's sort of in between, where I feel like so often we get locked into archetypes where it's like, oh, this is more of an interior forward, this is more of a perimeter forward or whatever. And this sort of falls in between that, where it doesn't get mentioned enough. And then you look at guys like, I mean, I say Todd couldn't put the ball in the basket, but like that was an area where he struggled. That's an area where a guy like Tyler Smith, who had a rough first year, struggled. It's like having that ability to do more than just the basic scoring part of your role and make something beyond that quick, simple skip decision, but to be able to put it on the floor, be involved in those actions. You just get so much more utility out of a player when they're able to do those things. And they can't, that utility kind of loses its value very quickly. To kind of piggyback on that, the next thing I want to talk about is having a go-to area for scoring. And I think with that, obviously, the three-point shot is becoming more and more important. I have these spreadsheets that I update every single year based on players that are earning second contracts in the NBA. And as time has gone on, the three-point volume threshold for forwards has gotten higher and higher. You have more players shooting at a younger age. They're taking more threes. Shooting, obviously, very important at the forward spot. What I will say is, if you are not shooting, if you're a player like Colin Murray-Boyles in this last draft, it is so crucial to be a huge factor on the offensive glass. And again, the other similarity that sticks for guys who aren't shooting a lot or aren't shooting very well from the forward position is not only being great offensive rebounders, but also being great passers on top of that.
Yeah.
You still have to have perimeter skill, even if you don't have necessarily the one that is shooting. You still got to be able to put it on the deck and make those decisions. Yeah,
we can break out a great example of what that may, or in his case, may not look like. We're in the middle of an ongoing saga with the Golden State Warriors and Jonathan Kuminga and trying to figure out what his next contract could look like. What is ultimately his role in Golden State, because I think when you hear those around the Warriors report and talk about how they see Jonathan Kuminga. I was just listening to the Hoop Collective podcast the other day with Brian Windhorst and Anthony Slater talking to Kuminga's agent, and there's been a lot of feedback that Steve Kerr, coach of the Golden State Warriors, sees Jonathan Kuminga more like an Aaron Gordon type of player than the wing creator that maybe Jonathan Kuminga prides himself on. And the reason why I would consider Kuminga more of a forward than a wing is he may have some of that functional ball handling ability to attack a mismatch. He obviously is a really good downhill driver, but he hasn't put together the three-point shot in a way that you would want him to in terms of being a more high-volume player. The decision-making downhill, right? When defenses figure out how to play him, shut off some of those angles and take those driving gaps away from him, is he able to make that next decision? And throughout his career up to this point, it's 100% fair to say he hasn't necessarily had a ton of opportunities to do things like that, but in the moments where he's been put in position to succeed offensively, it's been as a play finisher, not a play creator. So if you want to be one of these quote unquote star forwards in the NBA, if you want to be closer to a Jalen Johnson with the Atlanta Hawks, for example, then
Scotty Barnes too.
Scotty Barnes. Yeah. These guys have all taken steps as functional ball handlers, functional decision makers, guys who can bring the ball up the floor and consistently get the ball to where it needs to go. Maybe they're not assist hunters. Maybe they're not racking up a ton of assists in the box score, but you at least trust them from a decision-making standpoint to where if they catch the ball in a secondary action or they have to run a pick and roll in a pinch, like an inverted pick and roll, like you can trust them to make that next decision on offense and keep the ball moving. That's so important in today's game, is just not being a ball stopper. When we return to the Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings podcast, Maxwell and I are going to go over our tips for scouting forwards when it comes to the defensive end of the floor. Stay tuned. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I, for one, am trying to manage multiple long-term goals like paying off my car, making a dent in my mortgage, and saving up for my wife and I's first dog, as well as a few other improvements around the house. With Monarch Money, my wife and I can establish a budget and easily strategize around making sure our short-term bills are taken care of without sacrificing our long-term financial goals. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. Thank you for making Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings your first listen of the day. Moving into our second segment, Maxwell, we want to provide some tips around how we evaluate forwards from a defensive perspective to give our listeners some behind-the-scenes insight on what we're looking for in this upcoming draft class. All right, Maxwell, why don't you hit me first? What are you looking for out of the forward position from a defensive perspective? What do you prioritize in this upcoming cycle?
Yeah, the first thing that you brought up when we were texting about this was secondary defensive playmaking. And that is the thing. That is like the number one thing I'm looking for, to be quite honest. Being able to know where to rotate, when to rotate, being on time with those rotations, weak side shot blocking and rim protection. Even if it's not blocking the shot, it's getting into position as the low man in a timely manner, forcing a pass out, forcing a dribble pickup, forcing anything that can take away that easy look inside, and then the occasional jump out into a passing lane and things like that. I think this is just so crucial. And one of the biggest things that I think can be undervalued is just defensive playmaking metrics. If you are going to spreadsheet scout, if I want to see a block rate generally around 2.5 on the low end, if we're talking about a forward, and I think that number gets higher the older of a player that we're talking about. And I would also just throw in there that if you look at a lot of guys who've not panned out or had a hard time, this is usually one of the biggest areas, especially for guys that have that level of athleticism that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to categorize like Sam Hauser as a forward, right? That's sort of a different game. His role is going to be more to stay in front of his man. And then the weak side or in protection is going to come from guys like a Derek White or a Drew Holiday.
Yep.
But a player like Olivier Maxence Prosper, who we just saw, sort of very publicly, have his option declined and they were looking for a trade for him and all that jazz. If you look at his block rates in college, he had a 0.5 block rate during his junior year. Like, as athletic as he was and as good as he could be at containing the ball, that just off ball instinct, aggressiveness, and playmaking was never there from him. And obviously he had other issues. I think his issues are really more on the offensive side of the ball. But if he's playing defense like Tari Eason, maybe he does get, his option picked up. Where Tari was always all over the place in college. He's always been maybe a little too aggressive in some respects, but having that ability to impact the game as an off-ball defender, particularly around the basket and preventing those easy looks when bigs get pulled out to the perimeter is so key.
No, I think the defensive end of the floor is primarily where we would want to focus on for the forward position as a whole, outside of some of those offensive characteristics, because let's be honest, not every forward in NBA history has been able to stretch the floor. Not every forward in NBA history has been able to, reliably handle the ball for significant stretches and make plays off the bounce. We prioritize those things today in terms of evaluating a prospect for just being a rotational contributor to a potential star level prospect, someone we want to draft, near the top of an NBA draft class. But when we're evaluating the position as a whole, the closer you get to the back line, the more defense becomes a priority, because you have to cover ground for those who aren't going to make those plays on the perimeter, right? The guard position, we talked about it a lot. Those are some of your offensive engines, your offensive hubs. They're on the floor to drive offense from a scoring or playmaking perspective. The wing positions, very similar. You have a lot of guys who are on the floor to catch and shoot, but you're seeing a lot more wings get opportunities to be secondary and tertiary creators. When we're talking about forwards, and then eventually when we get to the center/big position, you have to be able to play defense and contribute in a number of ways, especially like Maxwell was talking about, the secondary defensive playmaking, right? Where are you on your rotations? Are you consistently communicating with everyone else on the floor? Are you calling something out for your guards and wings? Are you calling out, when the offense is running a screening action? Are you calling that screen out, making sure those guards and wings don't get blindsided? It's not going to be every single time your center has to do that job. You also have to have someone connected with your center, making those call outs. If the big man has to, step out, maybe cover a shot on the perimeter, and then offense swings a pass the opposite direction, then somebody else is involved in a screening action. You have to have a forward who's comfortable making those call outs. And in turn, they also have to be guys who can play some post defense. And I'm talking about, low man support, the ability to defend and box out centers in the post. When they're the ones targeted in pick and roll coverage, they have to be able to operate in a drop. They have to be able to come up to the level of the screen, hedge, show all those types of things that you would want a big man to do. Forwards are put in that same position because the game is so much, Maxwell, at the end of the day, predicated on attacking mismatches, right? So as a forward, you don't always want to be that mismatch that someone's targeting. You have to be able to hold your own, but in turn, you have to be able to support and defend down low. I think about guys who have struggled the forward position on the offensive end of the floor, but because they were legitimate post defenders, because they were secondary playmakers. Someone like a PJ Tucker, who obviously had to become a much better three-point shooter later on in his career to hang. But there's only one way a guy who's averaging like 2 or 4 points per game is going to stay on the floor and play like 28 to 32 minutes a night. And it's because he was so reliable defensively. He was only like, 6'5", 6'6", but he's built sturdy. He's built strong. He plays tough. You can't just bowl him over in the post. He can legitimately guard other 4s and 5s. If you're not going to be that offensive centered forward, again, you have to make your bones on defense. And that's how you have to be able to be a little bit of everywhere at once, but play smarter more than relying on this elite level athleticism. If you're quick, if you're fast like a Tari Eason, like you were talking about, that's fantastic. You're able to utilize your length a little more, but just being strong, being heady, knowing where you need to be at all times, especially in the post and helping down low, those are the characteristics that can get a forward player drafted.
Certainly. And I think at the same time, like, you do have to be able to survive out on the perimeter. Like,
Yeah.
even if you're not stellar, like, do you have a way to win or at least stifle advantage creation when you're guarding smaller guys? Obviously, foot speed's really important. But I do want to see some level of technique at the same time. I think, like, not everyone can be Evan Mobley. Like, Evan Mobley, even back to his college days, when he'd get a switch onto a smaller guy, the hips are low, the arms are out wide, he's down in his stance. Like, it's a thing of beauty. It's picturesque. A lot of these bigger guys, you know, you'll hear people talk about him as switchable because they look really fast when they run end to end. They can get off the floor well, and people assume, like, oh, they're athletic, so they're switchable. But then you watch them out on the perimeter, they're really upright. Their hips aren't low. They're getting really handsy. They're playing narrow in their stance. They're opening up their hips way too easily. You can drive right by them, and then they're too content to play from behind. When you get to the NBA, those guards are so athletic, they're going to slam that door shut the second they put you behind them a lot of the time. So I want to see comfort. I want to see the physical tools, because a lot of times these things are workable. Talking to people in the league, I think one of the things teams feel most confident in their ability to teach guys to do is just like playing basic fundamental on-ball defense. So, you know, that is something I give guys grace with. But at the same time, if I don't see that sort of technique and I don't see the recovery tools, suddenly we can find ourselves in pretty dicey territory.
100% technique. I love what you talked about with technique, communication, awareness, and understanding of what the offense is running in front of you, as well as where you need to be defensively. So important for every position, but especially the forward spot where you just have to cover so much ground. When we come back to the Locked On NBA Draft and No Ceilings podcast, we're going to break down one of my favorite preseason prospects in the class in forward Cam Boozer. Stay tuned. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel as a sports bettor because they have an enormous number of markets to bet and things to bet on, especially when it comes to the NFL. Same-game parlays, alternate lines, anytime touchdown scores, makes it easy to craft a bet slip that gives you the best chance to win big. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, Maxwell, our last segment for this podcast will be a conversation highlighting the skill and versatility of one of the top prospects in the 2026 NBA draft class, forward Cameron Boozer. Maxwell, why don't you give a little bit of an intro to the audience about who Cam Boozer is and why he's such a big-time player in this upcoming draft class and why he embodies a lot of the things that we talked about today.
Yeah, Cam Boozer is going to be a 6'9" forward out of Duke, and he just checks so many of these boxes that we talked about. There is such a degree of polish and physicality and feel and skill in that Cam Boozer package. Do you want to get into the offense first, defense first? Where should we begin the spiel?
Oh, we can take it wherever you want to take it. I think so offensively is probably where his game shines the most.
Totally. So he has a lot of that interior juice that we talked about. He loves contact inside. He can finish through it inside. He has post moves. I don't remember the last time I saw a guy that was 6'9" with post moves. He's like a throwback in that sense, but he has all the other modern stuff you'd like too. He can put the ball on the floor. He's really smooth with the ball in his hands. He makes these great touch passes. He can just 0.5 it real quick if you pass to him in the post or out of the short roll. He also, you mentioned outlet passes earlier, phenomenal outlet passer as well. Has a jump shot. It's sort of a work in progress. You can face up a little bit. Wish he was a little quicker with that first step. Wish he was a little quicker with the shot release, but still confident shooter. Will step up and drill it as a transition trailer from time to time. I think offensively what we're working with is just a real nice level of polish and feel, physicality, and the semblance of a real workable jump shot.
To me, he is the complete package offensively. You talked about the jump shot. He became a high 30s to 40% three-point shooter in high school, both from a set shot, off the catch. He was even, making some shots off the mood, catching and draining some three-point shots. Cam Boozer, to me, the most exciting parts of his game are what he can do off the bounce. So when I talked about, with an example of functional ball handling ability to attack mismatches. That's what Cam Boozer brings in spades. And I think it's not just the fact that you trust him to dribble in a line drive. It's when we use the word counter specifically, like, do you have counters to what the defense throws at you? Cam Boozer has those because he's so ambidextrous as a ball handler and as a finisher. And that to me is the rare standout skill of his that Maxwell, I don't necessarily see in a lot of players coming out of high school. Like, he can legitimately go left. He can finish with his left. Mm-hmm. You can't necessarily shut him off one direction or the other. He's going to be able to have that counter to get back and finish where he needs to. That combination of ball handling, the ability to stop on a dime, his footwork ability, and then again, the jump shots, just tying it all together, his ability to hit that pull-up mid-range shot. And then even if you shut off his ability to score, again, that passing on the move ability, he can find guys. He didn't necessarily have to do it a lot in high school. He played off of his brother Caden a lot, and he was able to be more of a play finisher than a creator. But when he had to create in the half court, you saw flashes that he could. The outlet passing, one of his most fun skills to be able to watch on film, like you highlighted. Like to me, I really don't see many weaknesses in Cam Boozer's game offensively. Like maybe he could be a little more explosive offensively with the ball in his hands. Like maybe you want to see a little bit more of how it's going to work from a higher volume perspective rather than, just your basic play finisher. But I think you're going to get a lot of those opportunities at Duke. I think he's going to step right into that Cooper Flag type of higher usage role. And I think we're going to get to see a lot of Cam Boozer offensively. Defensively, he also shares a lot of those same characteristics because of how he sees the floor and processes the game. He is a secondary defensive playmaker. He can help block shots at the basket. He has an elite skill as a defensive rebounder. Honestly, a rebounder on both ends of the floor, but really an elite skill as a defensive rebounder that ties right into that outlet passing. But he is a steady post defender, right? He can offer support as the low man. He can certainly play with fives down low, box guys out, contest shots at the basket. And when you put him in a pick and roll action, he can play more in a drop. He can come up to the level of the screen. You're not seeing him step over himself, cross feet, really get lost in the shuffle in terms of coming out to the perimeter or coming out and playing a screen up top. He has that type of versatility in his game to where you're not going to be able to attack him and really find a legitimate weakness in his game defensively. Are there going to be times where some of the fastest guards in the NBA might be able to blow by him? Like, sure, that's going to happen to a lot of forwards and bigs when you get to the NBA level. But it's the fact that I don't necessarily see that one glaring weakness in his game, Maxwell, on either end of the floor, which is why I understand everyone who has Darren Peterson, number one. I see it. Sure. I completely get it. He projects to be that offensive hub, that high usage type of guard, that guard wing combo that you really see blossom into a star at the NBA level. And you can cleanly project, I'm going to have that guy with the ball in his hands a lot of the time. He can be a number one option for an NBA team. But I think Cam Boozer can do more of those things than he gets credit for. And the fact that he is so polished, the fact that he is, to me, the reincarnation of Tim Duncan 2.0, right? Like Mr. Fundamental. That's really what I see at Cam Boozer. I have a hard time not ranking that guy number one on my board right now in the process. And quite frankly, I don't want to sound like I'm anchoring myself to this position for the entire cycle, because I think anchoring bias is a thing that we like to talk about and why, you can make a lot of mistakes when you commit anchoring bias. But I'm going to really have to have someone like a Darren or an AJ DeBonsa completely blow me out of the water to get me to sell, my Cam Boozer stock as number one.
Yeah, something I think a lot about with prospects, and Jabari Smith was kind of the guy that taught me this lesson, is like, what if a guy's like 20% or 30% less good at what you think their strength is? Because like with college basketball, like we just don't get that big of a sample. And like if Jabari Smith like profiled to be a bit better of a shooter than he was in the league, but he had so many outs because at the end of the day, he was a fine decision maker, not as good as Cam. But he knew how to play basketball. He could really sit down and defend. He could rebound. Like he had other stuff he could do. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind with Cam, and why like I can't see myself getting too low on him is he just has so many outs. If he can't speed up the shot and he's a bit below average as a shooter, like you mentioned, he's this phenomenal offensive rebounder. He can still put the ball on the floor. He can still pass. There's all these different ways you can get offensive utility out of him. And defensively, maybe the foot speed doesn't get to where you want it to be. Maybe he is just going to be a little bit clunky and having a hard time dealing with quicker players, but he's so good at understanding how to position himself. He's so good at using his chest on defenders. He's so good at knowing where to position himself off the ball. And he's always on top of the actions the other team's running, that it's like, I don't see him being a disaster on that end of the floor. And like, I really love the floor outcome here. And I think when players are so good and so productive at a young age, that always just lends itself to a potentially really high end outcome. I think there's a chance that he comes this year, he moves better. We saw him play back to the basket a lot in high school, and that always worries me a bit with guys, is like, can you face up and play a quicker game? But part of me just thinks that like he just knew he could win that way. Yep. And that we're going to see just a more functional game when that's not the best option for him. But like you mentioned, he has that ambidextrous counter game. He has all these different dribble moves and footwork patterns that he can use to get inside, that like, I don't even know that if you just make him face up all the time, that it's really going to take away much of his juice. Like I'm really intrigued by him. I think the floor is really safe, and I'm not generally a believer in the safe floors, but I think he has so many outs if the super high-end outcomes don't come along, that makes him a bit unique among the top prospects in this class.
And the final point I want to leave listeners with, and maybe it's something that we should have started off this segment with, but nevertheless, we're going to hit it on the back end, is how accomplished of a prospect he is coming in. He's arguably the most accomplished prospect that we have from a winning perspective since Luka. And I know Luka was more accomplished. He did win more overseas. What he did for Real Madrid was technically more impressive. But in terms of, dominating opponents stateside, there hasn't been a winner and an overachiever like Cam Boozer in quite some time. He's won high school championships. He's been a medalist. He's been an award finalist. He's been obviously part of all these exhibition all-star games that you could think of. Like, what Cam Boozer has done with his brother Caden in terms of just blowing the competition out of the water on a consistent basis, year in, year out, beating the top prospects every single time he's faced them in the field, or at least making it a close competition to where you can't necessarily say Cam had a bad performance against any of these other star prospects that you want to name. That to me means something. And when you talk with NBA scouts, evaluators, decision makers, a big thing that you always hear from them is, what have they accomplished in their careers? What have they actually done? Have they won something? Have they been a part of a meaningful championship team? Do they have that kind of experience coming in? Because if they don't, sometimes you're able to bring somebody into that type of environment in a winning situation in the NBA. They're able to learn from the right guys, and they're able to become what you want them to be as a top draft pick. But other times they go to a situation where there's not a lot of that around. Maybe there aren't a lot of vets around. They have to be the guy, and they have to learn and adapt quickly. And if you have someone who's comfortable, accomplished, and is used to that kind of pressure and expectation, it can mean the world for you as a potential top prospect. And so all of those things together is why I think Cam Boozer not only embodies what we want out of a modern forward, but he embodies what I would project right now as a number one pick in the 2026 NBA draft. We're going to see how it plays out. We're going to see if I'm right. We're going to see if I'm wrong. That's the beauty of this, is the audience. You all, thank you for listening to the Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings podcast. You're going to be able to follow us all year long as we break down Cam and all the other top prospects in the class. So again, thank you all for listening to big shout out to each and every one of you for listening to this episode of the Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings podcast. The Locked On NBA Top 100 is here, voted on by the NBA hosts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Our Top 100 was formed by experts that cover these teams and players every day. Find the full list on Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. As always, thank you all for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.